I got a letter from the government the other day. I opened and read it and burned that. Man, the way that I live don't concern that. Man,
So I want to get started, and the first question is going to be directed towards Netfa, and it's not because he's closest to me, but I think I think you'd be a good person to start with this. And the way that it's going to go, any of the panelists, feel free to chime in. But if there's a question that's asked, obviously there may be a question that, for instance, is directed towards Nisa with her relationship, her being Dominican. If you don't feel that you have anything to chime in any more than what the previous person said, don't feel any pressure or need to do so. So this first question that I want to direct to you, Netfa, can you give us an idea of what the social structure of Venezuela was prior to Chavez, specifically looking at the 80s and 90s? What was in existence before Chavez came to power in 1999?
Why do you think I can answer that? No, I'm just kidding. Well, I mean, it was like many what you call neoliberal countries where the elite ruled everything. The oil company was a national oil company already. People don't know that. But it was not treated that way. It was treated as basically the private property of the elites in the country. And so there was a lot of repression of social movements, and people were fed up. I mean, violent repression of social movements. And so, rigged elections. The United States supported for 40 years just a host of repressive thieves that robbed the coffers of the national coffers of Venezuela over and over again. In fact, the situation was such that most of the time they just did it enough for the people to be so fed up that they couldn't run again, and then the next person would come in and do the same thing, and then maybe sometime another president would run after the same president would come back after the next thief was put out of power. But that's pretty much. I don't know what to say. It has a constitution and everything, but not the kind of constitution that you see now. It was just like the United States in terms of its constitution being something designed for the powerful.
Thank you. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
When I was there for the elections, one of the things that the people, especially Professor Alejandro Correa, who's been here at the University of Maryland for events and spoke, and he pointed out to me, is that, from us looking at Venezuela, we always think that everything kind of happened with Chavez coming in there. That was the movement that came in there. But like Netfa was saying, there were some events that happened. There was a massacre in 1989, which was, by the government count, was maybe 300 people. But by those that were, in movement in that, obviously the number was way much higher, estimated about like 3,000. And there was massacres, more than one massacre and such like that. And so this one that happened on February 27th, 1989, was basically the start of the uprising, more of the people to rise up. One of those of the Barrio 23 de Enero was the significant of the uprising. But of course, the government was putting more pressure. There was people that were disappeared, like how it is with Guatemala and Nicaragua and such like that. So basically, when Chavez came in to the military and taking the position of where he tried to make an attempt, that the people had to look at there, and he said, well, he couldn't win then, but in the future he would. So, but yes, it was nasty, and with Perez, and then where did he go? He went to Miami, where we know is the place of a lot of exiles, such as like the Cuban exiles are in Miami and such like that. And then, if we jump ahead to when the coup took place, and some of those people that were involved with the coup in, was it 2002? Yeah, they escaped over to Miami and such like that. And then an interesting thing of there is that, now as the election is coming up with Manuel, the people try to make it seem like what Capriles is not that bad and such like that. But the people know that if they have to go backwards, then they'll go back to what it was like before Chavez, before Perez, and earlier years in that. So they don't want to see that happen. So this election that's coming up is very significant to make sure it stays in place what Chavez had put in place.
Thank you, and I appreciate you bringing that up because it's really instructive. What she said about going into exile, and it wasn't forced exile. It was it was really important. Like he made the decision to go to Miami, but you look at the corporate media, and this is really instructive for all of you out here, especially if you don't have a lot of background on Venezuela or even the U.S. media. What they will commonly do if there's a story about Castro in Cuba or Venezuela in the past with Chavez, they'll go to Miami and then stick their microphones in the faces of folks who they know are Venezuelan or Cuban who hate to death, Castro or Chavez. And as they showed that evening, they showed Venezuelans, driving throughout Miami, honking their horns in this very celebratory manner, celebrating his death. And unfortunately, most Americans don't hone in, and so they think that those Venezuelans represent the majority of Venezuelans, which couldn't be furthest from the truth. Luis, I know you.
I want to piggyback off what the sister said. It was so critical for me. Having never been to Venezuela, it was really interesting for me to kind of get an understanding for what was going on. My first trip there was in 2005, and as I told you, I was asked to be a part of a delegation led by Harry Belafonte. For those of you who don't remember, in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, President Chavez had offered to send, I believe it was 5,000 doctors to the people of New Orleans, which our most gracious president, in a very diplomatic way, said, thank you, but no thank you. So Mr. Belafonte started assembling a group of social progressives because he wanted to do something about it. He was really offended at the fact that those old voices or the status quo voices of the black left kind of punked out and said nothing in the aftermath of Katrina, although we know that there were some folks who were raising hell, but nobody can hear us, right? So what happened was that he put together a delegation of Danny Glover, Cornel West, Tavis Smiley, Dolores Huerta from United Farm Workers, one of my mentors, Nani Alejandez, who's been mentoring me for the past 20 years of my life, myself and some other amazing people. And the interesting thing for me was that we were in one of the co-ops, and I kind of went off to the side and started up a conversation with what was clear to me was a sister who was a recovering heroin addict. It was real clear to me. I grew up around them in the South Bronx as a kid, so it was clear she was recovering. But the interesting thing for me was when I started talking to her, and I had pulled her to the side while the rest of the delegation was talking with folks, I asked her, so what is this Bolivarian Revolution all about? I mean, don't worry about me. I'm not going to tell nobody from the government. I'm just a homeboy from back in the States. I mean, I'm from the same kind of neighborhood that you're from. What is it all about? And her immediate response really just, it was like she punched me in my face. It was like literally like, that's the problem with you American Yankees. You always put an image of a person to a movement, when in reality, in the case of our country, it's about the people. And let me clarify that for you. She says, a couple years ago, President Chavez came to us and told us he will build us new housing for all our families. Part of the effort was to kind of get all the folks from staying all in a very densely populated community right in the outskirts of Caracas, right, to move out into the rural areas because, and that's another conversation around agriculture that we need to talk about later, but she said, whoa, we don't need housing. What we need are the tools and the capital to build our housing and to build our community and build the lives and the infrastructure for our children and for our families. And so that became the prevalent theme throughout my 8 days there on the first trip and on my second and subsequent trips down there, that you kept seeing that. It's like on one hand, it was really clear, President Chavez was like the figurehead, but on a real, and the women are going to love this, the true movement was with the women of Venezuela. It was really being led predominantly by the women on so many different levels, by women. And I think it was important for me to start that, because I think that, we tend here being in the United States, we always look at things from, our scope, right? How we see things here, as opposed to how things really are in those countries. And I think it's important. I know we're going to talk about President Chavez's impact, but I think it's really important to understand that, because that is what's going to reinforce the fact that whatever they want to undo is going to take a long time. It ain't going to be easy.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, you asked me the question, I didn't really think about adding the conditions that people need to understand before the Bolivarian Revolution. Some of the conditions, mass illiteracy, starvation, things like this, poverty, these things were very serious. And not that they're not problems to some degree now, but they're drastically reduced. Prior to the Bolivarian Revolution, there were about 400,000 university students enrolled. Now there are over 4 million. So they, a whole lot of different things. Before there was no free health care, there was no free education. That stuff didn't, it just didn't exist. And now there's all of those things are being provided. And like Luis talked about, it's about social movements, and that there's a collaboration between it, which of course these things don't, it's alien to us. Part of democracy is not just voting. It has to do with how we participate in the processes and the things, the solutions that affect our lives. So it's not just voting for a candidate, but also voting. There's no right to national referendum in the United States. There's no national referendums. In Venezuela, and there was before the Bolivarian, they had a lot of countries have national referendums, but that's how you use them. But here, they're national referendums, just like one Solomon mentioned, national referendums. And so people also, when they have the social missions, which are now the money from the oil PDVSA is being used to fund the social missions, education, cultural exchanges, cultural development, medicine. And so, and in these things, as they alleviate the situations there, like Luis mentioned, it's not people coming in and saying, this is your problem, we're coming to fix it. It's involving the people in the solutions to their problems. And I was there in 2009, and we went there as a delegation to observe the medical situation. Barrio Adentro is the medical mission there. And some of the things that we went to, a lot of times people think of health care and health issues as purely medical things, malnutrition and all these. Sometimes they don't have to do with, the solutions are not necessarily medicine or giving food to people, but also giving food to people does help malnutrition, but it's not just a medical issue. So it's how do you provide food? And so they had a community where the people built a cafeteria in this community so that the children could eat before they came, and then have a lunch in the middle of the school free, right? And we went there and we ate. There was some good food too. And so it was very remarkable. They built a house. The Cuban doctors come and they're helping the Barrio Adentro and train when they come, the Cuban doctors, they have a mandate to not get involved in the politics of the country. So they don't, all these accusations about them coming and trying to spread the communism of Castro and all that's against their mandate. All they can do is come and provide medical care and teach and train doctors so that the Venezuelans will eventually be self-sufficient themselves in terms of medicine, having doctors who will go into places. The elite doctors in not just Venezuela, but a lot of places where Cuban doctors go and help, they will always say, they're taking our jobs, things like this. But this is ridiculous because the Cuban doctors go into places, neighborhoods, and not just in Latin America, but in Africa, where the doctors of the country will not go and treat people, especially not for free. And so jobs aren't being taken from them. So they would try to organize, and then people would, the people of Venezuela would respond back and say, well, you don't even you're not even, treating us and helping. And some people did answer the call, the national call by Chavez to have doctors, Venezuelan doctors, come and help and alleviate certain medical healthcare situations. And some did answer the call, but a vast majority of them didn't. In fact, organized to try to stop Cuban doctors from coming in. And so anyway, that's just I kind of diverted, but I want to really instill the concept, the democracy, and have people heard of the term participatory democracy? Where people are not, it's just about, so when people have referendums, a referendum might come in and it can start in a very localized area or go to a more municipal areas and then national, but in terms of the application of a referendum. But it means that the people are involved in forums where they discuss, they debate, they formulate the language of referendums. I mean, just the regular citizens. So these things are facilitated means. They're not just people coming and they're required to educate the general populace about the implications of the policy or the thing being voted on. So it's not just, this is what's mean by participatory democracy, and it's something that's spreading quite rapidly across Latin America, and mostly due to the legacy of Hugo Chavez and the Bolivarian Revolution.
Thank you. Nisa, did you have anything to chime in? All right. Thank you. And as we move to the next question, which Tim is going to ask, some of the things, like we have a lot of college students in here and some high school students that will be college students most likely in a year or two when they graduate. Right now, the average U.S. college student is graduating with $24,500 in student loan debt. And right now in the U.S. there's $1.2 trillion, with a T, trillion dollars of student loan debt that is floating out there. And 2/3 of it is fastly facing default. And so our brothers and sisters in Venezuela, they're not saddled with that right now because of what this Bolivarian Revolution brought in. They're not saddled with that, so they can go all the way to their MD, their PhD, their master's degree, or just their bachelor's degree, and they don't have to worry about being saddled with that student loan debt. And it happens to be the fifth highest percentage of college students in the world exist in Venezuela. Something also that is not going to be discussed on MSNBC tonight or any night.
So that being said, we've heard some of the great positive things that Chavez has done. My question to the panel is, given that Chavez has done so much for the poor and historically disenfranchised, why was and does he continue to be so demonized by the U.S.? And as a follow-up question to that, what does Chavez mean to you personally?
We're going to start with you, Nisa.
Well, firstly, I think that one of the reasons why he is so demonized by the U.S. is that he's not acting in the interest of the U.S. And I think was the Defense Secretary or one of them, he said that Venezuela, Hugo Chavez is not acting in the interest of America. That's why we don't like him. I'm like, so who should he act in the interest of? He is truly following in the legacy of Simon Bolivar, who wanted to see the unification of Latin America and the Caribbean, and he is fulfilling that legacy. Simon Bolivar couldn't finish it, so he left it to a brave person who could, and that's Hugo Chavez. And the other thing is that it's the meaning behind his actions that I think America is so scared of, because it has a rippling effect not only on the other Latin American countries, but also on the Caribbean islands and on a wider global scale. So his actions and what he was doing, and I'm not going to say what he is doing because it's still being done, is that it's having a big impact on the world. So everyone is saying that if it can happen in Venezuela, then why can't it happen in my country? If the people in Venezuela are taking control of their country and actually making decisions as to how they want their country to be run, why can other countries who are heavily dependent on American imperialism, dependent on European imperialism, why can't they fight for their country? So I believe that America sees Hugo Chavez and the work that he has been doing in Venezuela and across the Caribbean as a threat to them, to their national interests, to their pockets. So what he means to me. Actually, he's I guess a big deal for me. Not only because of what he's doing for my country, but what he represents. Because I studied a little bit on Latin American history, and the thing what is so unique about that region and the people is that they always have a fighting spirit, no matter what. And if you know the history, and I'm assuming that most people here knows the history of the struggle, colonizers, neo-colonialism, and just the plunder of their country, the resources. And Latin America is very rich on resources, but the people, they never give up. And Hugo Chavez is a representation of that. And if you know his background, he grew up as in the poor side of the country, and he made it that he rose up, and he actually represented his people on a large scale. And he had this heart, and to just give. And every time you actually see him speak, the way that he interacts with the people, I just feel like I want to actually be like that or do something close to that. So.
Let me start with a disclaimer. I don't put any man or woman on a pedestal. Right? There's only the Creator, right? And the Creator's perfection. But I will say the following. I remember one of the things that Mr. B said when we left the first time, and I say this and I quote him: history will dictate Hugo Chavez's true impact, not just on Venezuela, not just on Latin America, but on the world. So stay tuned. But I did want to kind of add a piece that not too many people talk about in terms of the demonization. And this is kind of one of those conversations that he didn't like talking about too often, but I really appreciated in the sense of his transparency. See, because the Caracas and what this sister was talking about was critical. It was his coming to Jesus moment, okay? Because I remember him in that conversation in Miraflores, literally in tears, talking about what it was like as a soldier to be ordered, right, by superiors to go out here and shoot and kill people, right? And it was always against his principles, because the man, like the sister to my left said, really had a lot of admiration for Simón Bolívar. And those of you that are students of Simón Bolívar know one of his most well-known quotes is, "Damn is the government that lifts his hands against his own people." And he had come to the realization that he had done that, because the next day, when the smoke cleared, he didn't see armed militias out there dead like dogs, but he did see 6, 7, 8, and 9-year-old little children who were shot in the back. Okay, and in some instances, he made those orders because he was told to do so, which is what a soldier does, right? So I think it's important to talk about that, because that is kind of what really got him to the point where he said, hey, we got to change this, Now, to take it even further, put it in this context as to why such a threat, right? Through the participatory political process of Venezuela and his political power, this man was able to revamp the Constitution, to eliminate all forms of racism, okay? All forms of racism, xenophobia, homophobia, discrimination on all levels. Okay, think about it in the context of the United States of America and what that means, okay? Think about it in the context of education, because that means we go back and we start saying, hey, you know what? What we've been telling you for all these years is a bunch of crap, right? And that's what, and again, it's not that he himself thought about this, but he facilitated a process, as any public servant should be doing, to allow that to happen, right? Then I start thinking about a little incident that took place when we were meeting Flores. One of my colleagues, rest in peace, named Bo Taylor, who does the same kind of work that I've been doing for 20 years now in LA, was down there, and he had this problem with his eye, right? And he had these shades on. I said, bro, we're getting ready to meet a head of state. take the shades off, homie. I know we homeboys, man, but we can't take the shades off, man. He said, man, I can't. So he kept them on, and I'm like, oh, Lord. So he comes in, and he says, he looks at him. He's like, what's wrong with you? Takes his glasses off. Oh, I've seen that. Let me tell you what I'm going to do, okay? And keep in mind, Bo Taylor was a man who sacrificed, made the ultimate sacrifice. This man was a servant to the community, okay, to keep peace in some of the most gang-infested communities in L.A. Bo Taylor didn't have health insurance, folks, okay? So when he came back to the States, do you think he was going to be able to address that issue? No. Let me tell you what President Chavez said. He said, tomorrow, I want you to go to Misión Milagros so you can get that eye treated, and he ended up getting surgery, right? It made all the news in Venezuela. Black man from the United States of America can't get his own country to look out for him, yet he does so much for young people and for nation building, but he comes to Venezuela and he gets treatment for his eyes. So hence, you start thinking about it, and it's like, yeah, of course, without a doubt, a major threat to the Washington Consensus agenda, So now for me, I would say that having been someone who had my own personal transformation in life to put me to the point that I am now, his story was like my story, because I'm always amazed at the ability of humanity, regardless of where we've been, to be able to get our shit together and help to change to make this a better place. And so I think for me personally, that was the one thing that I really appreciated about him.
Thank you. Five of you. Not first, so we have anything to...
Netfa, you just said it. It is a lot that he's done. How did you phrase the question?
Why was Hugo Chavez so demonized by the U.S. despite all the good that he's done, within his 14 years as president, and what does he ultimately mean to you?
I really think he was demonized by the U.S., not just because they're only just the U.S., but because the oligarchy who the U.S. was, trying to lick up to, have them as their advantage, their weapon against, to basically go after him. So, and then of course, when he got up on at the United Nations and stood up and said that phrase about with sulfur, and that, of course, that didn't go well for the Bushlikers and all that stuff like that. But for his advantage, he really did try hard to, at least for the Obama administration, to reach out. And unfortunately, Obama was marching to the same drumbeat as the Bushes, the Reagans, and everything as before, and of basically treating him as an enemy. Because publicly, Chavez even said publicly he didn't understand why this black man, as president, had such a dislike for him. And as you said, he's done so much for everybody. I would almost say that maybe it was just that Obama was just jealous of what he could achieve when basically he was the token president, and here's one that's doing a much better job than that. But the fact of it is, he really helped the poor. The most important thing that he really helped is the majority of the country. The majority of the country is mostly Afro-descendant. He had them and it's basically from those with the networks of Afro-descendants went to the Conference on Racism in South Africa and said, we're not just black, we're not just, whatever. We are the term Afro-descendants. So he had basically everybody in Latin America and even in Central America when it came to, like conference and that, acknowledging Afro-descendants as well too. And then he put in organizations in place for Afro-descendants. As we know with Jorge Guerrero. He was one of those people of Afro-descendant organizations, and Jesus Garcia. And basically, yes, they were very good, close friends of Chavez, but what he did, like for Jorge became the general consulate of New Orleans. And then just as this past, November, December, Jorge became the ambassador to Grenada, and Alejandro Correa, who we know for, doing his tours here, became the ambassador to Grenada and Benin and Ghana. So he opened the opportunity of, somebody that came from the bottom, just like he did, and just like with the president in place now, Manuel, a bus driver, of someone that that they can become a leader. But also with the indigenous people, because he is indigenous, is that the Parliament of Indigenous, I'm not probably giving the right name for it, he set that up in Venezuela, and basically wanted to see that as far as other countries, the Americas, to be have in place. And so, he gave that foundation and everything. And then the most important thing that I think really important here, which has been yanked away from here in the United States, is the arts for the children, the mission of the arts. Meaning that, for example, 2007, when Hip Hop Revolution came here, the arts, the mission of the arts there is basically how they could be set up. And then also, he's the type of person that's approachable. Just like if I see you, I want to come up to talk to you. This is how approachable he was to his people. When we saw him at the United Nations, his people were there, and he was approachable, talking to them and that. And I remember one time we went to visit a radio station, and it was a person that came up to him in the audience and said, "You know what we need here? We need community radio." And instantly, it was put in place for community radio. Now there's so many, I think it's hundreds of community radio stations around Venezuela and such like that. And then again with Hip Hop Revolution, recognizing with the work that they do as with hip hop and with rap, and seeing that as a type of art where, basically within our government here may not necessarily see that. You got to do a very strong education to them about it is a type of art, that he put in place tools that they can have set up their own radio stations, television stations to educate. They took that network and put it to Argentina, Colombia, and other countries as well. And now, I know you all have heard me say this over and over again, within Caracas, they have 40 schools of hip-hop. Now, when I meet artists like Nas and, other, hip-hop artists, they're impressed about the fact that they have this much in place in Venezuela. And with the partaking of the government helping on that. So, that's very important there. So I'm going to miss him as a person, but I see that he lives on with the children and the youth. And one other thing, too, which they brought up at the funeral, is his impact with the kids. When we had the ESNA conference, there was a little girl dressed up, nice, pretty dress and everything. And he asked her, who was she? She said, I'm Esperanza. Esperanza was Simon Bolivar's, I guess this day we would call partner. And she explained to us at the conference, and this was people from not only just the United States, other countries around that were at this ESNA conference, which Chavez said was very important for him to sit down and, meet with us, because he thought it was important that, it was a labor conference. It was important what they were doing. And so for this little girl to explain to us who she was and everything, and of course also how this little girl was doing in school. So I think, we're going to miss that impact of that, because I just can't see that with our politicians here doing that.
Thank you. Briefly want to comment.
brief. That's okay. Well, I want to read a quote. I think it also goes to answering the part of your question about why he's so demonized, and in a lot of ways, it kind of relates to some of the rise in hate that we see around Obama. And I'm not an Obama lover, but we can see the rabid hate, racism that exists, rears its ugly head when certain things happen. And even Chavez himself, he made this quote that's here, an article. This article, Sister. I'm going to also reference this article that I'm reading it off of Sister Nisa Williams. I think she lives in New York now. Wrote this article: President Hugo Chavez and Race: The Shift from Avoidance to Inclusion. Very good article. March 6, 2013. But she has a quote from him. He says, "Racism is very characteristic of imperialism and capitalism. Hate against me has a lot to do with racism. Because of my big mouth and my curly hair, and I'm so proud to have this mouth and hair because it's African." I mean, this is
That's right. That's right.
And so this is a profound. This is the leader who, with that kind of thinking and to give that kind of pride, express that kind of pride of this Africanness, which probably is unprecedented in Latin America in terms of the more, the less Black African and indigenous leaders that you see there. People just don't recognize it like that. And so that in itself, and he's right, when it comes to the powers that be, it tends because of European colonialism and slavery, this is serious racism. So that's one thing. The other thing I want to mention real quick, is, I think everyone already touched on a lot of the reasons why he's demonized, but and maybe you might you might have another question to speak to this, but I really want to talk about, and maybe I hold off about the media. There's always this claim, and not just in Venezuela, but a lot of times that the media is being clamped down on. And you have a question on that?
Yeah.
So should I wait? Okay.
I mean, while we're on that, I'll give that segue now to that question. I'll direct it towards you. And I really appreciate what you all said, but Sabrina and Netfa, when you mentioned the fact that this is an individual who, in a country that was under European colonization for 500 years, one of the first things he did early on in his career, he would publicly express, his adoration for the fact that he has African roots, that he has black blood running through his veins. He would say that. And so you compare and contrast that in a country here, and I think Obama has no problem kind of denouncing, because Obama has gone out. You have an individual here who you would never see Obama come out and say, "I'm so proud to be African American." He was on the set of The View, and he referred to African Americans as mongrels. We're kind of like a mongrel people. To say that, and then we're talking about a media system there for what Chavez did. A media system, the bulk of the media is controlled by the elites. And they routinely refer to him as a monkey. Like on their broadcast, routinely refer to him as a monkey. This is the kind of entrenched racism that we see in Venezuela. It continues to go on in Venezuela, mostly by the elites, and mostly the elites, the vast majority of them, are European Venezuelans. And so you kind of compare and contrast that, and I think that's why he was, so adored by the indigenous people that have strong indigenous roots in Venezuela, as well as those who are Afro-Venezuelans, because this is somebody for the first time in their lives that a major president, really not just expressing himself as having, their blood, but also proud of it, and then taking the next measures. Can you imagine if Obama came out, which he would never do? And if anyone in here believes that or thinks that, just like you believe that the second term is going to be a major difference. Ask those poor people who are suffering by way of his drone attacks in Central Asia and Somalia and Yemen. Ask them how much of a change there's been since from his imperialist regime 1 to part 2. But can you imagine Obama coming out and actually saying that we're going to institute some policies to thwart and to mitigate institutional racism? Well, that's what Chavez has been doing. So my question to you, and I want to start with you, Netfa, is it's not just the U.S. media, but politicians often talk about Chavez as well as his Socialist Party as being, politically, corrupt. They talk about the fact that he is a dictator. I mean, that's how they. I mean, don't let me get me started on MSNBC and the likes of Rachel Maddow, who also, referred to him as a dictator. Across the board, they referred to him as a dictator. But if you could talk about comparing and contrasting, like their media, their prevalent media there compared to this one here, because I think there's a lot of similarities between their media and the media here, and that whole notion that he clamped down on the media. He has this repressive, suppressive clamp on the media, and there's no public dissent, But is that quite the contrary?
I mean, it's definitely the contrary. I mean, I don't know how many people have been to Venezuela since the Bolivarian Revolution, and I was there. I've only visited Venezuela twice, and the last time, I mean, I was very taken back by a lot of private media, a lot of newspapers, television stations, all that. In fact, they dominate the airwaves. There's a government television station. What'd you say? And AID. Yeah, and AID.
Well.
And then there's wow. How do I begin this one? Okay, so it's not true that there's a clampdown on media, and it's very evident when you go there. And we were in the hotel that we were staying in. I'm looking at television, and just like Solomon said, they're saying the most outlandish stuff that you can't even imagine. Even people talking about him needing to die and all that kind of stuff. I mean, stuff that you can't really imagine would even happen here. It probably would happen here, though, if we had a president who was not an imperialist capitalist president. But that's probably not going to happen. And so there are all of these, and then this is not unusual to Venezuela. It's actually the modus operandi of imperialism whenever they're dealing with the leadership of a country that they do not like and that they want to overthrow. It's always about trying to throw claims of, it's undemocratic, it's a dictatorship. The only way to describe and make and validate the claims of a dictatorship is to make false things like they clamp down on media, or they bribe, stuff like this. I was watching this Al Jazeera clip. There's two stories, real quick. Is that and Keen Bot was on there, and this is very interesting. The elites. This was a debate. Elite Venezuelans who weren't in the country, and maybe one was in the country, and they were talking about the Chavez legacy. It was after he passed. And there's this strange sort of analysis calling the social missions, reducing them. In other words, they also have to discredit the social missions, have to make these things, belittle them. And so they were calling them political bribes to the poor. So you're feeding people, you're providing health care, you're empowering people, and now that's a political bribe? I mean, in order to get, what are politicians or leaders supposed to do if they're not supposed to do that? So it was a strange sort of thing. And they were saying, well, there was also an AP news story that talked about Chavez's legacy. Venezuela could have done, they could have done more. They have, these social missions. They don't use the word social missions. They say giving, things to the poor, handouts to the poor. But they could have done more, like what country were they referring to? Where they had this big monument. Where was it? Yeah, that's right. And Arab Emirates, where people are really living messed up, poor there, and they're referring to being able to building fancy buildings, multi-million-dollar buildings, and things like that, and that would have been more appropriate use of the finances of the country. This is a really strange thing. But another story was that, and then real quick, the state-owned media, people usually balk at state-owned media. There's a lot of countries, formerly colonized countries, that have state-owned media, and it's necessary because imperialism is very powerful. Unlike the United States, it cannot ward off a propaganda assault, which always accompanied the or a part of destabilization measures to overthrow countries, right? So they can't keep information from being crept into even on their own airways or radio or television, right? So they have to mitigate it by at least having their own medium to get their own information out there. And these are usually discredited by saying it's a propaganda thing of the government. In this country, they don't need it. Multinational corporations own and control media, and they own and control the government too. So the state doesn't need its own media. The private media does the job for them. But in Venezuela, there's a network called RCTV. I can't remember what RCTV stands for. And one of the claims was that they shut RCTV down. And there was something there. They didn't shut it down. What really happened was their license for broadcasting ran out, and they didn't renew it. And so it's just like they have a regulatory ministry for media, just like here, the FCC regulates things, and so you have to have a license. There was a woman who was representing RCTV who came here. Somebody, I can't remember who it was, had her come and speak at the Institute for Policy Studies where I work. And she was going to give this talk about what happened to RCTV and the clampdown of Chavez clampdown on media. So once I found out that this thing was happening at my job, I had to put the call out to, let's go, check out what's happening. In fact, I didn't even know. I found out the day of, and I was going to come into work late. Somebody called me and said, did you know this woman was speaking at IPS this afternoon? I was like, what? I threw my hand until I came. But the level of dishonesty, RCTV's license ran out for television, but they also have an internet station that they can do, So they still broadcasted the claims that she had, and she showed some little clip of them going to these hospitals where they were roach infested and all kind of stuff that she was trying to discredit the revolution. Now, I've been there. I've seen hospitals. One of our missions was to visit the medical centers. And so we didn't see anything like that. Of course, there might be some hospitals that are not up to par, just like here, But the point being is that media propaganda it's always part and parcel of the destabilization campaigns. And it is pervasive. So we have to really do our homework when it comes to knowing real information. I would just offer a couple resources right now to people. Films that are good. 3 films I can recommend right away, but there's probably a lot. Well, the Revolution Will Not Be Televised. How many people have heard of that? The documentary, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. Oh, it doesn't sound like a lot of people have. I'm not seeing a lot of hands, but that's one of the more popular ones. And what they actually did, there was an Irish film crew that happened to be in Venezuela in 2002 when the coup took place. They were trying to make a documentary, and they happened to be able to catch some of this on a lot of it on, and they made a documentary out of it. They weren't there for that because they didn't know what was going to happen, but they were able to see, capture them kidnapping Chavez, and actually, their documentary was able to expose the lie that was being put out in the opposition and corporate media that was saying that Chavez goons attacked the demonstration. If it wasn't for them having their camera angled in a certain way to be able to show that they were misrepresenting footage. I mean, we have to be careful. I mean, these people are diabolical. I always say when it comes to the imperialist media, take for granted none of what you read and only half of what you see and hear. So even if you think you're seeing something, you might not be seeing what you think you're seeing. So what they were doing was claiming that they were shooting at demonstrators when it's actually people were shooting back at opposition forces who had guns. And they weren't Chavez. I mean, they were just, a lot of people carry guns in Venezuela. And so they were just regular people trying to defend themselves. And if it had not been for that camera crew there being able to get the angle to show that where people were, where they claiming people were being shot at, the street was empty and clear. So this documentary, I'm going to wrap up. The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. There's another one called Venezuela Rising, which is really good. It talks about the elections and everything. Get these documents. And the revolution inside the revolution. And so what they're talking about is also this one is good because it's not painting a overly, none of them really paint an overly glossy picture, but it's talking about the challenges that the people are facing in the social mission. So in trying to implement the social missions, you have people who are debating and who maybe not be satisfied, but they're not anti-Bolivarian. And then I will also refer you to VenezuelaAnalysis.org. That's a website that's not a government website, but tries to put real information out there. And I'd read some books and articles by Ava Gollinger, who wrote Chavez Code. That book, and she also writes a lot. You can just find her. She's Venezuelan but lives in the United States, I think. And she writes a lot about also the destabilization measures that the United States uses against Venezuela, particularly U.S. Agency of International Development, which sounds so nice, doesn't it? They want to internationally develop things.
That's literally CIA.
Right. And some of y'all, they come and try to recruit you here at the university, and a lot of people will go in and they take these nice jobs. They don't know that really you're unwittingly helping imperialism, and that's pretty much the USAID. And the USAID is, while it may do seemingly good things, providing food and all this kind of stuff, it's really to keep to maintain U.S. hegemony around the world. So they're only band-aid stuff they'll do. But what they will do is work with the CIA, and they'll support opposition groups and all kind of things that they do. Also the National Endowment for Democracy. People need to know about that.
NDI.
NDI, the National Democratic Institute. And these are supposedly non-governmental groups, but they're not. They work very closely with the CIA. In fact, National Endowment for Democracy gets all of its budget from an appropriation of Congress. So there's nothing independent about it, right?
Which Reagan, when it was created in 1983, Ronald Reagan said, when he created it, it said, I want this to function like the CIA, which is instead of covertly,
right,
out in the open. Yeah.
And so anyway, and it's good to mention USAID and anything these, because this is where the media, the opposition media in countries get their funding and their support from. Only in the United States where there'll be bills passed that are specifically designed to overthrow countries. Like legislation that implement sanctions and call for the allocation of media, funding of media in other countries. Do you know if that happened here? Imagine one of us taking money from another country to organize opposition media or some kind of human rights group to talk about the human rights violation. We go to jail for treason.
Next door to Bradley Manning.
Right. And then these happen in other countries. And now Venezuela, they claim that they lock up a lot of people, and I don't see any evidence of this. But if they were locking up people for working with the United States government, which I think if I was a leader, I would do it, because it's called treason. So we got to be real careful. When they make these claims, they'll create situations that when the countries have to respond to them, they'll say, look, they're clamping down on their people. They're throwing, they're clamping down on democracy and human rights activists and media. So we have to be very critical about the information and just not take anything for granted. So do our own research. I'll stop.
Thank you, Brother Netfa. And I think you touched on some very good points. And it's always ironic when you hear, the U.S. trying to vilify other countries for their incarceration so-called problems, when this is the country that incarcerates more people per capita than any other country in the world. And that was one of the first things I actually noticed when I was coming here from Switzerland, where my family lives now. That this country that has the biggest GDP in the world, really when it comes down to it, the people aren't doing that good at all. Same life expectancy as Cuba, incarcerates the most people in the world. And so that being said, Sister Sabrina, I want to start off with you. What are some of the things that Venezuelans enjoy that the average American does not, even though America has so much more economic power than Venezuela?
Music. The music, and plenty of food. I can say that from when I went over there. I ate so much it wasn't even funny. And that's one thing with the missions and with Chavez put in place. It's there's no such thing as somebody being starving. unless they chose what to. Individual can get, money per month. And of course, what they do with it, if you got somebody that has a drinking problem or whatever, they used up all their money in that. And the resources that we mentioned here, it's available even for the, the elite, and that. But I have, what I really have to say, the most enjoyable thing that I liked when I was there, one, with the people of Barlovento, the drumming, drum. And if there's a time to go there, it's when the Festival of San Juan, drumming non-stop. And I mean, drums, the kids, everyone, dancing, everyone is a festival. But then the other thing too was then the election night. I remember about 6 o'clock that afternoon, it was already assumed that Chavez had won. And I was like, wow, that early? But those people, they got out like 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, and they acted like they were going to a festival. It wasn't like you're here, you stand in line, you got to get something to entertain. There was food there. It was enjoyable and everything. And when they partied and celebrated, let me tell you, it was a rolling party from Caracas to town to town to town to town by caravan, SUVs, cars, and everything, blasting music and everything. And then the interesting thing was the campaign music. Now, when I came back there, I was jumping up and down and telling everybody, basically, the kids and everybody knew what time it was for that election. The main key song that they had there was F the Imperialist. The kids and everybody. And even had the dance where, I don't, for the camera, we don't need to show that, but you can imagine on that. But they meant business. They meant business. And, this wasn't coming from Chavez. This was coming from the people. They meant business. So they knew what the Capriles, what he represented. And incidentally, being Jewish, his family owned a lot of the right-wing newspapers and such like that, the media as well, too. So they knew what he was and that he was a tool of the imperialists. And so they came out swinging, and this is what we expect for them to do with this election coming up in about, April 14, as long as the U.S. doesn't pull any tricks. Because like they did, they tried to sneak money in there to the opposition and everything to try to stabilize it. That was how with a couple of years ago with the referendum on the term limits for Chavez, why it didn't pass. One, people didn't take it seriously because they knew, it was going to be a win. And not that many people came out to the poll. But the second thing that got on me was that in there was also saying, as far as the rights of the workers, and I was like, wait a minute, they didn't vote on that? But, the people didn't come out to the polls. And then there was the sabotaging that, that the opposition, had the money in there to filter in there so they can try to get as many in as positions as would be in mayors, heads of the states and such like that. And so I hope that's not the case that's going to be happening now, because the government is not supposed to have so much money since sequestration's mess is supposed to be happening. So, we have to look out for that. And like Netfa was saying, is the tools that they use as the media. But one reason why Chavez had a problem with RCTV is because a friend of mine that was Afro-Venezuelan gave me a DVD that showed what was actually on there. It was very risque. So, of course, with what he wanted as far as for television, mainstream television, it had to be acceptable for any age watching it. So that was a real problem of with RCTV. It was very risque.
Thank you. Luis?
I think one of the things to respond to your question that I think is really important for all of us to really understand is what happened in 2003. I think that is the most critical juncture in the whole Bolivarian Revolution. Because for those of you that don't know, that is when the oil moguls basically tried to destroy the movement. They sabotaged the oil production in the country. And as a result, President Chavez, with the Pistolets, with all the other social movements, moved fast to have the state control petroleum, okay? And do your own homework. Don't just listen to what we have to say. But it speaks, the information speaks for itself. The data speaks for itself. Look at what happened from 2003 to 2011, okay? We saw drastic decreases in unemployment, okay? Remember, because of the state control of petroleum. We saw drastic reductions in poverty. We saw drastic increases in education and drastic increases in access to health care, okay? Those are the most critical things that impacted, for the most part, the majority of that country that was, again, living in what? Poverty, okay? So, yeah, one could easily say that was Chavez successful? It had to give, and the people that took the hit were the people who had the money, okay? But remember now, we're talking about hundreds of years of poor people taking the hits quite often. And so it's really important to understand what that impact was. And then again, looking at why corporate media has gone so far out of their way to look at that. If you get a chance, I saw a blog today based on the piece that was written, The Death of the Boogeyman, right? The corporate media burial of Hugo Chavez. It's written by David Edwards. And it was a response to what came out of, what's the British publication? The Guardian, yeah. So if you get a chance, look at that. And then look at the findings from Venezuelan economic and social performance under Hugo Chavez. And again, if you pay close attention, by the way, that's by Jake Johnstone, pay close attention, you will see how this man was smart enough to take something that could potentially destroy the country and was very strategic in allowing him to really change forever the course of the plight of people that were in dire poverty, in that country. I think I can't emphasize enough how in itself how important that was, because at the end of the day, remember we have our own little romantic thing going on with him because again, and this is what I remember leaving here with. When we were leaving, I had probably a 2-hour conversation at the airport with Mr. Belafonte, and it was like, damn, I'm really frustrated. I feel like I should stay here and be a part of this. And he's like, why do you want to be such a punk? Why don't you take your butt back into your communities and help push social movements with those people who are most marginalized in your communities? Because at the end of the day, that's what President Chavez was saying to us. He was very clear. He had no beef to pick with us. He had a beef with imperialism, right, and neoliberal economic policies. But at the end of the day, he knew, what the stories were. And I'll leave you with a real special story real quick that I think puts things into perspective and humanizes them. Because, see, that's what corporate media does. It dehumanizes people. Last summer, I went to prisons in El Salvador and met with the gang leadership from MS-13 and 18th Street. And how many times have we seen National Geographic, the Discovery Channel, do all these documentaries that portrays these brothers and sisters as animals? Well, that's all a part of a savvy strategy to dehumanize people. What happened prior to the Civil Rights Movement? They dehumanized black people and called them savages. What happened to the genocide of Native Americans in this country? They were called savages. It's the same old. It's just, different little flavor. That's all it is, But the one thing that I thought was really critical for us in that conversation in Flores that I wanted to share with you is when we got off the bus, I told Mr. B, I was like, we have no gift. This man is the head of state, and we have no gift. And so everyone was trying to figure out what do we give him. So I go in my pocket, and I'm a baseball guy, I coach baseball, and I pull out a baseball, and I pull out my Sharpie, and I say, we're going to autograph this ball, we're going to give it to him. They're like, what are you talking about? See, I did my homework. He was a former minor league pitcher. So he had a huge admiration for baseball. So we all autographed this baseball. And I'll never forget it because as we went around the table and everyone was telling their story, their struggle, right, for peace and social justice in the United States, the man teared up quite often. And I'll never forget this about him. Every time he teared up, he would just take that ball and he'd be sitting here, and like where the brother is sitting with the camera, that was Harry Belafonte and Danny Glover. He would take the baseball and just go, howdy, He didn't act like he wanted to throw the ball at him, but it was kind of like, you know, this human side of him that we were privileged enough to get to know. Many of the people that he served in Venezuela got to know, but unfortunately, you know, we can't be naive about it. These are the folks who can control the billions of dollars and can mastermind whatever image they want of anyone. We'll take Mother Teresa and make her look like the devil herself, right?
I just want to add something. Sister Sabrina mentioned about food, and I just want to touch on food security, and that is one of the things that Venezuela has that Americans do not. And the fact that, yes, there is a welfare system here, but it's so faulty, I'm going to use that word, that you cannot even compare it to what Venezuela has. And the way that it is set up is that it is community-based. It's not just a hand-me-down system. And that's the thing I have to admire about the Venezuelan people, is that they do not want hand-me-downs. They want to actually do it for themselves. And the way that he did it is that there were like a lot of land which was abandoned by, it was abandoned by European-born or European descendants who left it when he came to power, and they either went to America, back to Europe or whatnot. So it was just there. So I think there's a law that after X amount of years, the government can, take it back. But he didn't just take it back. He actually paid them what it was, the cost of the land, and he redistributed to communities through families. So the land was now it was a community owned and it was community farm. So the produce that they got from that land, it was theirs, and they decided among themselves how to distribute it among themselves. And the people, they were represented and they were responsible for their communities. They did not depend solely on the government. They needed the government to give them the first step. But other than that, they felt empowered to do it themselves. So they would form small leadership groups in the communities to actually decide or make decisions of what is going on in the community. And on a larger scale, if there is something going on from the government down, they will come in the community, they will discuss it, and they will say how they feel about it, and they will choose somebody to represent them and take it up further. We do not have that in America. So I just wanted to touch on that. We mentioned education, which is free, healthcare, which is free. So, and to encompass everything, that the people have this self-determination, and that is that's going to continue. So it's not just in Venezuela that it's continuing, it's staying, but it's spreading as well.
Thank you. And with that being said, I have one last question for you guys, but I think it's actually appropriate that this question be opened up to, I think it's a good segue to welcome people to the microphone with their comments, because I know there are folks I know personally, and maybe some folks I don't know, but the folks I know personally, like Sister Asadawa, that I know probably have some comments or questions for the panelists. And that question was, before I give that question, I want folks, if you're fairly new to this issue, and I would say, and if you've been watching CNN every single day since his death or prior to that, you're the complete opposite of what you might consider, you don't know the issue in any shape, form, or fashion. And I want to pose this thought to you. And I'm a big supporter of Hugo Chavez and the people of Venezuela and the revolution. I will put it out there. I make no bones about it whatsoever. But I'll let you know, if Hugo Chavez, I would denounce him in a second, if Hugo Chavez put forth a bill that allowed, the secret police, if you will, to go in and have warrantless searches in your home. If Hugo Chavez was a leader that had a kill list, that meant that if you were on that list, you are marked for death anywhere you are in the world if you're a U.S. citizen, and not as if U.S. citizens' lives are any more valuable than our brothers and sisters in Afghanistan, Libya, so forth, anywhere in the world. A human life is a human life.
That's right.
if there was something like the Patriot Act or the NDA, which your President Barack Obama used subterfuge on December 31st, 2011, to sign into law a bill which he and his administration requested that U.S. citizens be put on that, called the National Defense Authorization Act, called NDAA. All right, so before you get into throwing stones, and saying this about Chavez or this about anybody, anybody else that the U.S. wants to criticize, start to look around and what's going on in your own country. And the reason why it's not a big issue to you is because you've fallen prey to the corporate media and you watch it, and the corporate media has dictated to Americans for a long time what they think about, how they think about, what issues to think about, and how to think about those issues. Because if they were doing their job, you would have had millions of people in the street in 2001 saying, no. If this was terrorism on 9/11, you going into Afghanistan and doing airstrikes, which those airstrikes in Afghanistan took more innocent civilians than did 9/11. That is terrorism itself. Don't do that. They would have been in the streets by the millions in 2003, preventing the U.S. invasion and NATO invasion, and let's just say the U.S. controls it. But if it was put out there by the corporate media, you would have literally. I'm gonna go ahead and prognosticate and say you would have had scores of more people that would have gone out to the street and prevented that invasion of Iraq based on known lies. But these are things that are going on right now. Obama has a kill list. He has orchestrated more drone attacks than Bush that we'd like to talk about. More drone attacks by at least 8-fold. So a human life is a human life. Chavez has not done that. He has not invaded anybody. So where do we get off pointing fingers and saying, oh, NBC says such and such, and Fox News says he's a dictator? Where do we get off doing that? When are we going to get out there and actually pressure and say, you know what? This is enough. This is enough. We're talking about tens of thousands of people who have lost their lives by way of drones in Central Asia, in Libya. 50,000 people died because of that war based on lies. Just like Bush had a war and Cheney had a war based on lies, Obama had his war based on lies that he did without consulting Congress. Went in there, unilaterally and started and got NATO behind the U.S. and 50,000 Libyans later, in a war that targeted black Africans, whether they were Libyans or elsewhere, women brutally raped, financed rebels. If Chavez was doing any of those things, then you would have a right to denounce him. If he was invading other countries, you would have a right to denounce him. But he has not done any of those things. Not one. So I want you to think about those things. And so my question is to everybody, and I welcome folks to come up to the microphone to answer this question or to ask a question to the panelists. And obviously the question is open to the panelists as well. What do you think Chavez's legacy will be? And as you alluded to, Luis, and Chavez, I would say, most importantly alluded to, that this revolution is bigger than him. That the revolution, if the revolution only exists during his lifetime or your lifetime, our lifetime, it's not a revolution at all. What he helped build with the people was an institution. And we're going to find out how powerful that institution is. I believe it's going to be even stronger. We're going to find out April 14th that it is something much, much stronger than what the U.S. and other imperialists prayed that it would be. And so what do you believe that this revolution will bring forth in 5, 10, 15, 25, 50 years down the road? And we'll start with Luis, and I don't know if Sister Sadawa, who was a part of something that happened on Saturday, and I know my dear sister Aisha Fleury, led a delegation with Black is Back Coalition on Sunday that was outside of the State Department. So everything that I just said, she and other folks were outside in front of the State Department, protesting the State Department to keep your hands off Venezuela. Keep your hands off Venezuela. Stay away from these elections. Let them continue to determine their own destinies. So if you want to get on the microphone as well, we'll start with Brother Luis Cardona.
I just want to start real quick by undoing all the toxic damage that CNN has been doing based on what Brother Solomon just talked about. 3 books that you must read, because you have to understand the madness and the method of this man. You have to understand what his point of reference is. The first one, and I don't know if they have it in English. He gave it to me when we were in Venezuela. The book is called Liberador, and it's written by Simón Bolívar. It's 850 something pages, but an amazing book that you have to read to really understand the historical context as to what he's done. Obviously, Chomsky's Hegemony or Survival, American Quest for Global Dominance. And then the book that he tried to give our nice president, the first time they The Open Veins of Latin America, Eduardo Galeano. Because I think we have to be strategic at this point. The demonizing of Chavez will continue. Oh, I'm sorry. The last one, Open Veins of Latin America by Eduardo Galeano. But part of the strategy, and I'm pretty sure that he would agree, as would the rest of the Venezuelan people, is that we have to take it out of the context of just being about Chavez, but really make it about the people of Venezuela, and keep doing that. And these three sources of information are critical for all of us who want to do advocacy, who want to be able to put out what is the correct information in our different networks. Okay, I know it takes time. You know, believe me, you will find it. Give up a night of partying on the weekend or whatever, or watching the subs, and you'll be amazed at how much you can read, right? But I highly recommend that we do this because, again, what I said earlier is so critical. They will always continue to dehumanize this man and then dehumanize the people, right? And so we have to make sure that we really are on point of our understanding, because that's part of what the issue is that we deal with, Salma. Everyone doesn't know all these things. Everyone hasn't had the opportunity to read a more objective version of what historically has led to so many of these problems. Even I remember always hearing this from the opposition all the time. They said, we created Chavez. The opposition always says that. Have we done a better job of taking care of the social needs of humanity in our communities, there will be no need for Chavez. Wow. For just remember that. Because that is the same kind of rhetoric. If you listen to Capriles' rhetoric right now, what is he saying? Oh yeah, I'm going to keep the missions. I'm going to keep supporting them. We got to keep doing them. Right? So it's important for us to at least have a point of reference, but I wanted to at least share those. And I'll be around to share that information later on.
Anyone want to step up Aisha and then Sister Solomon?
So I saw that, what was the first one she said? I didn't know the name of it, the video.
Will the revolution will not?
Yeah, I saw that. And that thing, like, when I saw it like years ago, I was just like, I was like enamored by the whole people defending a president. Like, I had never seen that before in my life, and I don't even think that that would even happen here for any president.
No.
And
No.
So, like, that to me just showed what a good leader is. And I think that the legacy of Chavez is an example of how people who have this information, people who know about colonization and neocolonialism and imperialism and capitalism, that we don't just keep it in like intellectual ciphers, that we need to go out into the communities in which we live and depressed communities that we may not even live in, and communicate this in a way that the masses understand it, organize the masses in our area. I mean, for me, it's just like his legacy is like, you know, the book you were talking about, but I've also been reading The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. I'm speechless because I'm reading it and I'm just thinking that, you know, a lot of what's in this book, Chavez employed. Chavez like really embodied the basically steps on how to be successful in a revolution to become non-colonial, to decolonize yourself. And I think that that's really important, that as we sit here and we talk about this, that we can't be afraid of the people, that his legacy should live on with us, not just in terms of Venezuela, don't even look at it in Venezuela, but wherever we are. I have family in the Caribbean, and I think that that's like, to me, it's like tragic what's happening with neocolonial regimes in the Caribbean islands, and the United States is also, you know, disgusting. And I just think that we just need to organize. We can't be afraid of the masses. We need to go out into the streets. We need to organize, communicate this, have political education rallies wherever we are, and inform the people, politicize people, because if something were to pop off, if the people aren't educated, they're not going to follow. They're not going to do anything. They're going to sit there and look at you like you're crazy. And then as soon as the colonialists come in with their toys, oh, I'll give you a car, I'll give you a little bit of more welfare, they're going to just drop the struggle and keep it moving. They're not going to support it. So I think it's really important in this moment that to continue Chavez's legacy, to do that work that needs to be done, because eventually it's going to happen in this country, the way the system is right now, and we need to prepare the people and prepare ourselves.
And I want to say, definitely. And I want to say, as we move on, I want to point out a couple folks in this room that if anything that she says kind of ignited something in you and you're like, yeah, I want to be a part of something like that. There are individuals in this room that do this week in and week out. Sister Al-Kamar right here is a part of a weekly political education course, and you know, Brother Edward X just stepped out. We have right here my dear sister Krishona, who was with her One Love. We have Aisha Fleury, who failed to mention that she does political organizing, gets out into the community, part of Black is Back. I'm happy to be a part of that coalition with her. But that's the work they do. They're situated right there, you know, with ABDET. They're situated right there in Berry Farms and have a community house there. And I've seen it firsthand. Kids come in there, and the kids walk in, and you see, you know, Red, Black, and Green, Marcus Garvey books, you know, Paul Robeson. I mean, so they're getting what they're definitely not getting in the classrooms. And I think it speaks volumes that I just pointed out 3 sisters, all right? Women have played a tremendous role, if not a bigger role, in a lot of these social movements than have men. And so I just think it's like apropos that I just pointed out 3 women that are in the room that are doing that important work that Aisha just pointed out.
Let me also point one other thing too. When you mentioned the women, at the Afro-Descendant Conference, I was impressed about with the women that were fighting in the revolution. And some of them are National Assembly representatives there in Venezuela. So, you know, that's important too. And then what we need, especially since things are changing and we need to be alert of things, I would recommend that VTV is one you can get on the internet. I don't think it has the English translation. Usually I depend on my friends that are Afro-descendant to let me know what it's saying. But the other thing too is with the embassy, the Bolivarian Venezuelan embassy, get on their email list. So when you know, and check the news that is on there of what's on that's current of what's happening in Venezuela, to keep up on that. And then also next week Tuesday we got a little problem here. Yoni Sanchez is coming to D.C. Do you know who that is?
Yes.
For those that don't know, it's not a good picture. She's one of those against Castro, and she's coming to spread her film. But in other countries, she's been stopped. In Brazil, she's been stopped. And so she's coming on Capitol Hill as a subcommittee and doing a presentation there.
Sure.
When we were on the street protesting in front of the State Department, we had somebody who said he just came over from Venezuela 3 months ago, and he was upset that we were talking about, you know, keep the Bolivarian Revolution alive, and he said that Chavez had created division in the people. One of my comments was like, yeah, because the poor hate the rich. That's the division. I just wanted to add that anecdote. I think that's important that you just lay it out as simple as that.
Get them.
Okay. Yes.
Hi, I'm just quickly give a remark to the panel. Thank you very much for organizing this. This is a very precious opportunity for me, coming from Malaysia in Southeast Asia, to be here. Honestly, I need to let you all know that Hugo Chavez's influence and his death deeply felt by all the socialists and civil rights, civil society activists in Asia, Southeast Asia, and Japan.
That's right.
So immediately when he passed away on my Facebook, so many people just talk about all the quotes of Hugo Chavez. And then the Party Socialist of Malaysia distribute a list of 50 things that he done that is very good for the country. But interestingly, because now I'm studying in Maryland, I talked to my roommate who is a Chilean, and he told me that, no, he's a dictator, do you know? And then he forwarded me some news from the New York Times. So thank you.
Wow.
Thank you very much for this panel. I think the films and the books that you all have mentioned here, maybe you can put on a mailing list and continue to spread it. I'm happy to just post it on my Facebook to my socialist friends. Thank you.
We'll talk later. Maybe this is an next.
Prashana?
Okay. This is going to be people to come up, because this is, the information we had was on the fact that we're colonized. And I loved what the sister said about, decolonizing the minds and politicizing the people. That's what we were trying to do, with the workshops. Just, it's like an hour-and-a-half long workshop on understanding the fact that we're colonized, and how to decolonize. So we're like, how do we get people here? So I'm telling Solomon, I was like, I'm friends with a lot of artists, and it's interesting because artists love to, be heard, you know what I mean? But I told a lot of my artists about this event, and a lot of my artist friends didn't come, but I'm like, okay, so then how do we work with that then? Okay, then how about we invite the artists to come and have an open mic, because everybody loves an open mic, you know what I mean, and give them this place to perform and everything, which is cool, because then it also hits the community, and it lets them feed the soul, like the spirit, because a lot of people have this talent that needs to come out, that are also our corporate, the music media does not allow us to hear as well.
Sony and them.
Exactly, Sony and them, right? So we're like, okay, well then it's actually a part of the movement then to incorporate the local positive conscious performers that aren't getting radio play because of our clampdown media. So then we're like, all right, bring them in. Don't antagonize them for not coming, bring them in. So then we're like, okay, then we realize a lot of people are not going to come because if they're not making money out of it, then how they going to come? So we're like, and my friend told me, like, Shona, you have to add something that the people are going to want to come. People have needs, economic needs, survival. So we're like, flea market, boom. There's already local vendors in here, and that adds the need of supporting local vendors instead of supporting mass corporations. In every way, we're connected to supporting the corporations. So then how can we, make this movement all inclusive? So that's how we came up with this idea. So it's performances, it's flea market, and of course there's the film session. And we realized that a lot of people get overfed. Like a lot of people, won't come for an hour-long, movie. So we try to boil it down, whatever the theme is of the month, to about 20, 25, maybe 28 minutes. Boom, open it up to the community forum. Boom, performances, we're dancing, we're laughing, like whole time we're giving, giving folks information. The real mission of One Love is, like the sister said, to politicize the people. You know what I mean? But you don't realize it because you're laughing and having fun. The kids are there and eating and all this stuff and everything. But that's why, we did this. So if anybody's down, this is once a month. We want everybody. We want Black is Back. We want everybody, because a lot of stuff Black is Back is doing, we need to be hip. We need to be hip on what everybody's doing in the community. So if anybody's down, please, we're trying to make this a regular thing.
Form and food, right?
Huh?
Form and food.
Form
so
and
after
food,
the
yeah.
film, people politicize themselves, ask questions, then they get to give their own, feedback. Ooh, I realized after that film that this is what happens to me, and they get to eat. That's important.
And they get to eat, and we have the local food people and everything, and the vegan and vegetarian and health. It's all health conscious. So yeah, this is why, we do it. So come, spread your knowledge. That the forum piece is so big. When people knowing that we exist. That we care, not just about our own economic interests, So that's it. That's
and then
all.
plug your events.
Yes,
Like
plug
on the
your
22nd.
events, plug your
Right.
causes, plug your missions, all of that. That's why we're doing it, and we want to do it on a regular basis. Yes, and Black Studies class. I also go to Edwards Black Study class every Thursday, and it's on point. It's on point. At Solomon's events, Edward X's events, I'm there. So, all right, that's all.
Good evening. My name is Asantua Nkrumah Toure, and my sister here, you're a socialist? We need to talk later, because I'm a socialist too, all right? I would just say real quickly that the best thing, and I wish there were more students here this evening, but I think the best thing for everyone is to visit Cuba, to visit Venezuela, and see those countries for yourselves. So it's easier to visit Venezuela because there's no U.S. embargo against Venezuela. As we know now, there's an embargo, U.S. embargo against Cuba. I would just say to all of you to please visit these countries and others and learn about them for yourselves. And I'm with a group called Free the Cuban 5 and some other Cuba solidarity groups. So if you want more information about that, please see me a little later to discuss that, because I really, really, really want people to see these countries and see what it's like to be in a place where people are really free and live in dignity. All right, so thank you very much. Oh, and one more thing. Saturday, April 13th, 12 noon, there will be a rally against U.S. drones in Africa and other parts of the world. Saturday, April 13th, 12 noon in front of the White House. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much. You actually, that's a good segue. She takes delegations of folks to Venezuela, and you're preparing to leave in the next couple months, I believe.
Yeah. I don't even know what language to speak. I'm like, Baragani. But anyway, hello everyone.
Baragani, and what's up?
Right. Hola, ¿qué tal? My name is Macy Watson, as Solomon said, and this is great. There's so many different perspectives here, and what you all are doing is excellent. Something that myself and another sister, Sade, were trying to do. So I'm like, oh great, I can just call her and we'll just combine with you all. And so yeah, and I just got your flyer today from Nation House School. So I'm like, oh, I get to meet you all. So thanks. So anyway, I'm doing a tour to Venezuela, to Barlovento, as she mentioned, where the drumming happens. But for me, it's more than drumming and dancing. It's everything connected together, because we as Africans, everything is connected. Spirituality is connected, culture, language is connected. Politics are definitely intertwined in that. So I like to take a mixed group with me every time. I'm a dancer, but I like to take a mixed group so that everyone can connect in different aspects of African life there. So I do the tour every 2 years, and we're going this year in June from the 20th to the 27th. We'll be going to Caracas so you can get a feel of the city, what's going on with African descendants in the capital, and we'll also be going to 2 or 3 different towns on the coast of Venezuela that is inhabited by majority African descendants for the San Juan Festival. To do workshops with them, to learn about their culture, the retentions of Africans there. We'll also go to the University of, it has a new name now, but what is called the HBCU in that area. We'll be going to that university to talk to the students. La Universidad de Argelia Layas, I think. So I'll pass this out to everyone if you have any more questions or want to see pictures from the last trip. It's on.
I got a letter from the government the other day. How been and read it and burned that. Man, the way that I live don't concern that. Man, we gon' have to settle this another way. A letter from the government.